welcome back. And we're doing our next presentation, which is making a plan. No, sorry, living options. I'd like to introduce Rikki Garcia and Shelley Hackett. Rikki is the Head of Integrated Commissioning and Systems Development, Adults with Learning Disabilities, Complex Needs and Mental Health Integrated Commissioning Unit, Adults, Mental Health and Learning Disability Services, RBG. And Shelley is Commissioning Lead for Learning Disabilities. So I'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Brilliant. I'm used to standing up, so I'm probably just going to be swaying from side to side. I'll try not to. And I'm also used to having slides in front of me, so I'm going to be peering backwards slightly. Thank you for inviting us. We're going to go through, I was roped in, to be brutally honest, slightly at the last minute. So I am responsible, I'm Rikki Garcia, as we said. I am responsible for commissioning health and adult social care services for working age adults across Greenwich. So that includes mental health, learning disabilities, transitions, autism, physical disabilities, and complex care, amongst other things. And Shelley is in my team and is one of the lead commissioners responsible for learning disabilities and autism as well. Yeah. So I'm going to lead and Shelley's going to chip in whenever I get anything wrong. So hopefully there won't be anything too incorrect. This is a very non-interactive session, but at the end we do have some questions. So if we've got time, it'd be great just to get some feedback from people. And if there are, like I said, some of this is not my direct specialist knowledge area, but hopefully it's correct. If you pick up on anything, please feel free to shout. And tell me that it's nonsense that I'm talking, but hopefully it'll be right. What I'm going to try and do is give you a broad overview of what commissioning is and how it applies to this, and then go in a bit more detail about what kind of processes there are in terms of finding housing and finding accommodation, particularly in care and support for your loved ones. So, so there's a bit about kind of very top line stuff, which may or may not be interesting, but it's kind of the context of where we are as a borough. And then some very practical stuff. And then at the end, I've got some questions because we're trying to gather feedback from as many people as possible. And it's fantastic to have a room full of carers that I can ask direct questions of because I don't get to do that very often. So I hope that's okay. Shelley, do you want to add to that at all? No? Do you want to add to it?
No, it's okay.
Right, so the vision, which is a very bold sentence. So we have... within Greenwich, we've been through a big restructure recently, a big change around commissioning. We've brought the ICB, the NHS, and the local authority together. So we are an integrated team. So we commission on behalf of the council and health services. So particularly, probably the area that has the biggest impact is mental health. So when we're providing mental health services, quite often some of that is partly funded by health, partly funded by the council. We've brought that together so it's a single decision-making structure. So we are, I'd say nationally, Greenwich is probably ahead of the curve in that sense. We are, even in South East London, we're probably more integrated than any of the other 6 boroughs. And it's new, it's quite challenging. We're still figuring out, where pots of money are, who's responsible for this, that, and the other. I had a question today from a lawyer about whether I can instruct council on behalf of the ICB, and I have absolutely no idea. That seems one that needs to go up to the director to find out. The purpose of bringing us all together was to streamline processes and to make it so that we can actually deliver positive outcomes for people, for everybody living in the borough who has any kind of support and care need. We're trying to move away from functional outputs-based commissioning, where it's like the number of hours delivered is X, Y, Z, and move to more outcomes-based commissioning, which is this is what this person wants and this is what this person needs. And we as commissioners have a responsibility to find services that provide that, essentially, regardless of what particular kind of detail it is. And sometimes it's up to the providers themselves to work out. Most of the time it's down to, in fact, almost all the time it's down to the individuals that we're supporting, carers, families, etc., to tell us and shape those services.
I think as well, just to add, Rikki, is one thing that is key to our team as well is that we do have people with lived experiences. So they have children or young adults living with them that have sort of like learning disabilities, neurodivergence. So they know what's important as well from their perspective. So it's not just a group of professionals with textbook knowledge, it's hands-on person experience, which also helps.
So this is our current structure. So we're the working age adults is the pinky red bit in the middle. The blue is for older people primarily. And then green is our market quality sustainability. So they do all the quality stuff. And that's where our co-production team, I think Em's here today. You might have already spoken to her. So we've got 3 co-production leads who are dedicated to not necessarily going out and doing all the co-production and engagement themselves, because there's only 3 of them and we have however many tens of millions of pounds worth of services. But they are developing a centre of excellence for co-production so that we absolutely are committed to embedding service user, resident voice in the centre of absolutely everything that we do. And it's a developing process. We're not there yet. It isn't perfect. But this is, and it's a new team. I think in our pinky red bit, we've got, I've been in post since December. My manager, who's the AD, Jenny, has been in post since November. And then of that little group, I think about 5 people have started in the last 3 months. So it's brand new. We've got a few people, fortunately, like Shelley, who's been involved in the council for a long time, well, for a while. We've got, in some of the other teams, there's people who've been around for a bit longer, so we do have some organisational knowledge, which is really, really helpful there. But we have lots of new people as well, so like I said, we're still trying to figure some of the stuff out. So, just some basics, I guess. We have a statutory duty under the Care Act to provide care and support for people who need it. That includes carrying out Care Act assessments, Care Act reviews, sometimes financial assessments, those kind of things. And we, as an integrated team, work collaboratively and are increasingly working collaboratively, not just between social care and health, but also with housing, with the voluntary sector, and with all the other kind of system partners that are there to try and coordinate and make things better. Like I said, it's developing. Integrated commissioning is slightly ahead of the game, or even within Greenwich. We're now looking at, there's a review going on of our whole adult social care service to make sure that that's doing the right things in the right places. So there'll be some, you'll be hearing about that, no doubt, over the next few months, couple of years. Primarily what we want to do is make sure, as I've said, that people get the right support at the right time, and in the right way, and in a way that actually they want. And that's the thing. It's not something that should be done to people. All of this is a partnership. So you as carers, our residents, the people that you work with, the people that you love, that you live with, are all part of that process and are all equal partners within this process to try and make things happen. In terms of living options, and I'll go into more detail on these, there are, broadly speaking, 6-ish, and there's lots of variations within those, but as a broad kind of category summarization, for people with learning disabilities or mental health or any physical disabilities or anything else who have care and support needs, there is living with family, which is the obvious one, which I'd say probably the vast majority of people do currently, particularly younger people. There is living with family with additional support, so you might have carers that come in to assist, using personal budgets, that kind of thing. There's floating support. So as well as living with family, there's living independently, so lots of people are able to kind of live in their own homes, live in their own properties, and we'll talk a bit more about the challenges of that in a bit. But what we can do is provide floating support, so outreach, people who pop in, not to do personal care or those kind of the stuff that you might be paying for through personal budgets, but for example, if somebody wants somebody to come and help them do an activity, they might pop in once a day or a couple of times a week just to make sure they're okay, help them with bits and pieces, filling in housing benefit forms, those kind of things. So it's a whole range of different services that can be provided through that. We have shared lives, which I'm sure if you haven't been spoken to, they're set outside this, you can talk to them, which is fantastic. It's one of my favourite things, partly because I used to be a foster carer with children and my partner's a supervising social worker for foster carers, and the model of it is obviously different with adults, but the model of living in somebody's home with that little bit of extra support and care, but primarily living mostly independently, I think is brilliant for a large number of people. What we don't have is enough carers for that. We need to grow that, and there's a big push at the moment to develop and grow it. And shared lives can be used not just for people living permanently. We're looking at options for things like respites, day respite, longer term respite, that kind of thing as well. Supported living. So this, you might hear sometimes supported living, supported accommodation. Generally, it's living in a property that is owned by somebody else, usually a social landlord or a voluntary sector organisation, or it might be a private landlord. But it's a dedicated building where people with support needs all live there, and they live semi-independently. There are different levels of supported accommodation within our mental health pathway, for example, which is primarily for people who are being discharged from hospital, mental health wards. we have a mixture of high and medium needs. So the high needs supported accommodation means that there's somebody, a support staff on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have medium needs support as well, where that's mostly kind of a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 9, either Monday to Friday or Monday to Sunday, depending on the thing. There may be additional support provided on top of that. So within Greenwich, and I'll go into the detail, we have a mixture of all kinds of different supported accommodation. Some, not enough of the right kinds in a lot of cases, but I'll come on to that as well. We have supported accommodation that is under block contract, where we directly commission a provider to provide X number of beds across X number of buildings, well, X number of units, I suppose. And then we have lots and lots of spot purchased accommodation, which is one-off packages of care and support in accommodation or otherwise. We have a lot more of those currently. Then there's the next step, I guess, from that is residential care, which is your sort of more traditional care home type thing, which is full wraparound care and cover. We have, relative to some other local authorities, we have quite a high number of learning disability residential care properties, and mostly delivered under block contract, but we do have some spot purchased accommodation as well. And that tends to be fairly traditional care home type stuff. Very good quality, generally speaking, and it's right for some people, but it's not right for everybody. And what we try and do is kind of start from the top and work your way down. So independence first is like absolute priority. Where possible, where able, we want people to live as independently as they can. And then you kind of grade the support according to their needs until it gets to the point where they're safe and comfortable and able to achieve their goals. And it's alongside that, and it's not really at the bottom, but it kind of dips in and out, is respite care, which I know is a particular issue in Greenwich. It's something it's a high priority. We were literally just talking about it before we started this. And one of the questions we got right at the end is people's experience of respite, and what more, not so much experiences in Greenwich, but actually what the needs are, what people want from respite, and how we could then best provide that over time. So we have a range of different options for respite at the moment, some of which are well used and some of which are less well used. As part of our commissioning process, as I said, we're responsible for quality, so all of our properties, whether they're block contracts or spot accommodation, every single one is quality controlled. We have a quality team that go out and do visits, and they're very, very thorough, detailed visits. They look at support plans, they look at the decoration, they look at the standard of care, they look at the staff rotas, they look at everything. It's basically like mini CQC inspections. So we are confident that the homes that we place people into and the services we provide most of the time are of a very high standard. The quality team do lots and lots of checks because occasionally, and we have a lot of providers, a lot of different properties, things go wrong from time to time, but we take those very, very seriously, and we have immediate meetings whenever there's any concerns raised. There's a whole quality alert process that anybody can access alongside the safeguarding process as well, which I'm sure you're aware of.
And there's a set team dedicated to the quality of the services we've got in the borough.
Yeah.
So that is their job. They go out and they make sure that the homes are of good quality.
Yeah. And they will let the homes know if they're not good enough quality or if they're failing in any other areas. They're not scared to challenge providers. So we're looking at, I'm going to get some detail, we're going to look at kind of changing the way that we commission some of our services over time. But absolute priority, number one, is it right for the people that are using services? Number two, is it good quality? Number three, for us as commissioners, is it cost effective as well? So there we do have to take into account the costs element of it, but without compromising on the outcomes that we want people to achieve. Just some information about some of the partnerships that we have. We have a range of different kind of governance boards and support boards. So particularly for these ones, we have a Learning Disability Partnership Board, which is made up of a whole range of different providers, where there's people with lived experience on there, including our Learning Disability MPs that we have, and organisations, including the Council Health, but voluntary sector providers, Oxley's, people like that attend those meetings as well. Similarly, our Autism Partnership Board has just restarted. We had one running for a while, but it sort of stopped. We restarted that, so we had a new one on that happened this week, actually. So that Autism Partnership Board is now looking at developing, in the short term, a strategic plan for adults with autism in the borough. The strategic plan will lead to, we hope over the next couple of years, a much more comprehensive all-age autism and neurodiversity strategy, because Greenwich currently doesn't have one, and we do need to have one, which will identify what the objectives for the whole system are, not just the council, but the health service, voluntary sector, etc. What we need to be doing, what we as commissioners need to be commissioning to provide those services, where are the gaps, and there are significant gaps we're aware of. So that's a really important part, and it's a mechanism for everybody to be involved in that process. And the strategy isn't the council going, well, this is what we think we need. It's actually what are people telling us, and how can we put that into action? How can we resolve those issues? And that's the purpose of it. The strategy for me is basically just an action plan, and that's what it should be. And as we talked about, we have our in-house co-production team who are going around and supporting all of this work and doing direct pieces of engagement with residents, but also helping us to make sure that we're doing it well and engaging people. And they liaise, for example, with assault teams because we're doing some engagement with our learning disability accommodation at the moment for people, and we want to make sure that even people who are non-verbal, etc., can articulate in some way their feelings and their experiences of living in places. So that we make sure that the right partners are involved in that. So our procurement plans, which is probably, unless you're really interested in procurement, it's not very exciting, but it takes up a lot of my time, so I thought I'd put it in. So we are doing a big review of our learning disability accommodation at the moment. So that's looking at all of the buildings we have, all of the providers we have, in-house, outsourced, contracted, spot purchased, etc. Looking at and includes respites. We're looking at the demand. We've been doing some light touch engagement. I wouldn't say it was proper co-production at this stage because we have a very tight time constraint on this because we have contracts that need reprocuring, and so we have to get it done this year regardless. But we're building into the contracts that we reprocure this year for our accommodation services. Flexibility is what we're aiming for within those contracts so that we can look at, theoretically, we might want to deregister one of the care homes and turn it into supported accommodation, for example. It's one of the ideas. We haven't got any plans for that yet. So the review will look longer term. It will look at what do we have, what do we really need longer term, how are we going to find out what we need in terms of how we're going to engage with people, that kind of thing. What are the options from a contracting, commissioning? Are there capital spend, for example? We've literally just purchased 5 of the 5 buildings, which are existing residential, learning disability residential care properties that were owned by the NHS, but the council's now bought the buildings off of the NHS, which gives us a lot more control over them. It gives us more potential to do redevelopment works, refurbishments, etc., longer term, if that's what we want to do. So that would include things like Arnold House, 3 Samuel Closes, and Erindale, I think is the other one. So they were owned by the NHS, but now us. Very early days, we literally just completed on them a couple of months ago, so it's taken a long time to get to that point. But it means that we can now start putting plans in place and going, actually, this building's not really fit for purpose anymore, or it needs a bit of an adaptation here and there to make it a better place for people to live. So we're doing the block contract procurement this year. It's about £5 million worth of contracts per year, so if we do it maybe a 3 to 5 year contract, it'll be about £25 million worth of services. We are looking at developing a contract, and Shelley's leading currently on developing a specification for all of our spot purchased accommodation. And hopefully I've got the numbers somewhere. Yeah. So we have a lot of spot purchased accommodation. And yeah, so something like, what have we got? I've forgotten the numbers off the top of my head. But we have the Glow homes, which are in-house ones. We have the choice support residential care properties, which are the 5 that we just bought. There's choice support supported accommodation. There's 3 buildings in that. There's the Kemsing Road Respite Service. And then there's 180 spot placements, I think, for people with learning disabilities. And then a slightly smaller number for people with mental health support needs. And then more for people with purely physical disabilities, for example, as well. So there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of different providers, some of whom have 1 placement with us at Greenwich. We have ones in borough, out of borough. We've got them all over the country. They tend to be in Greenwich or local to Greenwich, but we do have them in different places. So there's a whole host of different placements. So we are looking at the moment, it's very ad hoc, those spot purchases. I'll come back to that slide. It's very ad hoc. So a need is identified. It goes through our process, which I'll go through, and then we source a placement, and then that person goes into that placement on a very simplistic level. What we're going to be doing is putting a contract in place so that we have more control over the costs of those. We're going to be identifying the providers where we have multiple placements. We have some providers where we have lots and lots of spot placements. There's no reason why we can't do those under a block contract, theoretically. But even if we don't, once we've got a contract in place, we're then going to develop a framework. So from a procurement point of view, framework's basically a preferred suppliers list, essentially, where we will have much more control over the costs, much more clarity over what we're actually paying for. So it's not so much that we're paying too much for providers, but sometimes we're not 100% sure about what it is we're paying for. So is it one-to-one support? How much one-to-one support? Do they need one-to-one support 24/7? Do they need 2-to-1, 3-to-1? Is it just core hours of the support staff on site? All of that stuff. So we're getting clarity on that. It will support and increase our approach to quality control as well, and make it much easier. I mean, we already do a really good job of it, but make it much more quicker and more defined process for dealing with quality issues with providers. And above all, what we want it to do is a flexible framework, because what we know that we don't have enough of is properties that are able to manage more complex needs. So people with a learning disability and a physical disability together, people with a learning disability and potentially a mental health issue, or any combination, we find it more difficult to find accommodation for. We know, for example, that across our entire mental health pathway, block contracts, of which there's about 110 bedrooms in total, and another, I'm going to guess, about 120, I think, spot purchased accommodation, we have 1 or 2 fully accessible properties. So we have hardly any properties that are and not just have a ramp up to the front door, but proper wet rooms, accessible kitchens, all that kind of stuff. We don't have enough of that. One of the opportunities that we have from purchasing these properties is that those ones actually aren't too bad, because in learning disability accommodation, it tends to be a bit better. We do have more accessible properties, but still not enough. And what we don't have is providers necessarily who can deal with that range of and complexity of needs that people have. So we're really working on that. And the framework hopefully will enable us to really target the market and make sure that we're either sourcing providers or helping providers to develop. So we want to provide training and support mechanisms to enable people to employ the right people who can then deliver the care and support that's needed in those more complex cases.
And that's the thing as well. I think it's important that you all know what we're doing as a council to make these things available. But in the long run, this is going to have a benefit on the people that you're supporting in having better quality and a better range of services. So some of that might sound a little bit jargon, but ultimately the outcome is going to be we're going to have a good market of services that will really, really help people living in them to flourish and reach their goals and things like that.
Yeah. So the Pathway Alliance model is something that's interesting from a commissioning perspective. So within the mental health pathway, we have 3 providers who have formed, we call it an alliance. So those providers with the council and with Oxley's and the ICB through us as well, are now in a partnership. So we contract them, but it's a partnership. And we've employed a pathway coordinator who oversees referrals, manages voids. A void is when there's a space in a building that's not currently being used, and that's not good. We want spaces to be used. And so there's a kind of a single process for managing all of that accommodation and making sure that people are in the right place and managing move through as well. So less so with learning disabilities and physical disabilities, although it does happen, but with mental health, for example, it tends to be faster turnaround. And people can move through the system much quicker. But sometimes they might be moving up to higher needs or down to lower needs or out into independence, or rarely, we try to avoid it, but back into hospital. So we're going to be developing that through the mental health pathway and trying to expand that, increase the number of providers. We want to implement something, this is probably 3 to 5 years away, across learning disability and physical disability as well. What it does is it not only gives us much more control over that pathway and more flexibility in terms of moving people around, it also means that there's much more investment from those providers because they are part of it and it's in their best interest to make it work properly. And the providers we've got, so we have Riverside Sanctuary, who are here today, and Bridge Support within the mental health provider, and they all operate buildings and deliver care and supports, and some of them own their own buildings as well, and they are 100% committed to that pathway. The pathway coordinator we fund, but they're employed by Bridge Support and seconded back into the council as kind of this independent facility, which seems to be a really good model. So that's a lot about the commission and procurement type stuff. Feel free to ask me questions afterwards about that. Like I said, this is the kind of provision we've got. It's a wide range. Our floating support outreach services at the moment are quite small. Probably the biggest gap from this perspective is respite. So there is the Kemsing Road 4-bed respite service. We do offer respite through the rest of the contracted services as well. So the choice support homes will, from where it's appropriate, because these are the people who live there, it's their long-term home. So we don't want to be putting people in potentially who might disrupt that, it will be for short periods of time. So we're very, very careful about how we manage that process. But there is opportunities for respite through that. I know that there are, through brokerage and the care reviews, etc., there is respite offered in lots of different ways as well. So there's spot purchase respite, there's additional care coming into people's homes, all the things you're aware of. Whether it's coordinated enough, whether there's enough of it, whether it's easily accessible and stuff, I can't comment on that. I know it probably isn't, broadly speaking, from sort of general feedback I get from people. So we're really keen to see, not just when we re-procure, what do we do with that, but actually how does it fit into the wider pattern, the wider picture, what do people actually need from respite, and are we providing it currently? So, broadly speaking, and this is where my knowledge might get a bit chunky, but technically, this is the process. There are lots of variations. It should primarily be very, very needs-led. So whatever the individual wants, whatever their needs are from a support and care point of view, what your needs are from carers and family members' point of view, that is all part of that. So that's fundamental to this process, but from a purely process basis. First of all, there'll be a Care Act assessment. That can have happened at any point. Quite often, particularly people with physical and learning disabilities, that happens when they're children, and they might be on an EHCP, they transition into adulthood, and then there's a Care Act assessment that determines their needs with an annual review. Sometimes for people with mental health, that might happen later in life. People who develop physical disabilities later on, it might happen when it's needed. That's done by a social worker. And the Care Act reviews for everybody apart from people with mental health issues are done by social workers. Within mental health, it's managed through Oxley's, and it's done through the care coordinator role. So it's a slightly different role, but the technical detail is the same. So it's Care Act assessment, and then at least annual reviews. The minimum legal requirement is an annual review of that assessment. And that assessment should be done with you and the individual, and you should be shaping that review. And it includes everything. I mean, anything that person needs, the individual needs, whether it's additional life skills, it might be education, it might be accommodation, it could be all kinds of stuff. Then there's a discussion. As part of that, their options will be explored. So for carers, I guess, who have people living with them at the moment, and I think the kind of gist of today is that as carers age, and it's a big problem, what happens to your loved one as you get potentially too old to look after them? That sort of planning, I think Beverly probably talked about planning as well, which I'll touch on, but I'll try not to go into too much detail because she knows more about it than I do. But that planning needs to start early. It's really, really important. And that should happen primarily through this Care Act review, the Care Assessment Review process. There may be additional meetings, and you can talk to your social workers in theory at any point. The system isn't perfect by any stretch. And resources are massively stretched. Social worker caseloads are high just across the country. It's not a Greenwich problem, not specifically a Greenwich problem, but that's where it happens. If a decision is made that the individual might need to move into different accommodation, whatever that may be, whether it's independent living through just having their own tenancy, through to residential care, which is much more kind of wraparound care and support, whatever that is, that process, the social worker will make a referral internally within the council. It then goes to what we call the QAO, which is a quality panel. And that panel is made up of a team of professionals from commissioning, from finance, from social work, from Oxley's sometimes, in mental health. Might have the occupational therapist on it, for example. And they will look at the review. The social worker will have spoken to brokerage, who find properties, find placements, and find care and support from the market. So they're kind of the brokerage/home finding in adults are almost like the front line to the market. So they're the ones who know the providers, and they know where the spaces are, and they know who to phone when we need X type of care or X type of provision. That package then goes to the panel. The panel will look at it, review it, make sure that all the options have been explored, with a view to look at that kind of independence first approach. Is shared lives more appropriate, and go through that, and then ultimately agree a package, whatever that may be. There are some variations with that. If the person's got a personal budget, there's some differences in terms of how they might want to apply that budget and what they can spend it on. But ultimately, what would happen is that the person goes into independence, or they're going to one of our block contract accommodations, or they're going to a spot purchased accommodation. And that could be, like I said, supported accommodation or residential care, floating support, or depending on the needs.
And I think we know some carers were worried that they would be passed from this department to another department and it'd be quite a difficult process, but technically the social worker will take lead on the process from start to finish, but there will be input from other teams and other professionals just to make sure that nothing's been missed and everything is right for the individual.
Yeah. So your key point of contact through that process is the social worker.
Yeah.
There's a whole host of other things that go in there, so mental capacity is another big aspect of it. It particularly will affect people who may not have mental capacity under the Act and following an assessment, for example, to hold their own tenancy. That doesn't mean that they can't live independently. It might mean that there needs to be a guardianship or some kind of court of protection order that means that where a guardian is appointed to manage that tenancy with them. But if somebody's able and has capacity, they can have their own tenancy. Usually within supported accommodation, we don't use tenancies as such as a kind of a legal thing. We use licenses because they tend to be shared accommodation. And so a tenancy means that it's very difficult if people do want to move on or if we need people to move on because their needs have changed and makes it much harder to do it. But if they're in independent properties, in their own house, own flat, then they will get a tenancy. There's a whole host of things around mental capacity, which is not my specialty, but I know it does impact on how those decisions are made and the impact. But you as carers and family members and stuff should all be fully involved in that process and should be part of that. Housing tenancy, so if they're going into their own accommodation through the normal routes, generally people with support and care needs are a priority. So it's generally a bit easier. You shouldn't have to, once the need is identified, you shouldn't have to sit on a waiting list for 10 years to get a council property. You may be difficult to find an appropriate property, so there may be delays with that. So particularly if you need adaptations, etc., there isn't enough. So we've got a whole other project plan to work with landlords to see how we can help with that and see what we can do as a system to provide funding potentially for adaptations and that kind of thing. But you'll go through, if you're going through intro tenancy, it goes through the housing process. They will get a tenancy in the normal way. If it's in supported accommodation, then usually what happens is there's a referral. The provider may or may not own the building that you're moving into. So Sanctuary, for example, within our mental health pathway, own all the properties that they operate from in Greenwich. Riverside, although it's a housing association, don't own any of the properties they operate from. They operate under lease. So they have properties that are owned by mostly other housing associations that they lease on a long-term basis. They then manage that housing process in terms of getting the leases, getting a tenancy or a license agreement together. And that will be attached to, but support from the care and support needs element of it. So it sounds more complicated. I'm making it sound more complicated than it is. Ultimately, somebody with the social worker will assist. The property, the support provider should also support with that process as well. So there should be lots of advice and support through that process. And there are other places you can turn to in Greenwich as well for that kind of support. If it's residential care, and throughout this whole process, there's often financial assessments as well. If it's residential care, particularly a financial assessment might be made. There are variations on that. So, for example, if it's somebody who has been sectioned under the Mental Health Act at any point on discharge, they are covered by what's called Section 117, which means they don't, you don't do financial assessments for people as long as they are on an aftercare plan, basically, which could be indefinitely. But ordinarily speaking, there will be some kind of financial assessment which will determine if there's a contribution to be made to the care. I think in most cases we don't have that many. There will be some top-ups. There are situations where you might be offered a provision where you don't want that one because it's in the wrong area or something, but as long as it meets the needs and it's an agreed cost with an agreed provider, you have the option, you have choice throughout that whole process. If you choose a provider that's significantly more expensive, there may be top-up fees that apply to that. It's all very, very case by case, but it's something to consider. Similarly, housing benefit, usually if within our supported accommodation or independent living, a lot of the time people will be eligible for housing benefits. You get exempt housing benefit in a lot of our supported accommodation, which means that the housing benefit covers more than it would do in a normal tenancy. So it will cover some of the care package. It covers things, sometimes it covers things like overnight security and concierge services and that kind of thing. But that should all be explained through the process, and it would depend on the property and the individual and financial assessment and all of that stuff. Then, I'm sure Beryl's talked about planning. The process should be, and it doesn't always work out this way, but it should be a well-planned process. So you should have enough time to think about it, come to terms with it, talk about it properly, go and visit the placement. You're well within your rights as carers and as the individuals who are involved to visit the properties, to talk to the support staff there. In fact, we'd encourage it. I don't think that happens that much, to be honest, but we really would encourage it. And then give us feedback as well, because we do visit all of our properties and have this quality assurance process, but real-time feedback is always really important.
And it is a very daunting process for people, aren't they? They're moving to a different place. The transition should, they should go and meet the people that are living there, the staff that will be supporting them. It's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's broadly the process, and then the person moves, and there'll be a continuing assessment, and you get to visit them, and hopefully it'll all be wonderful. And in most cases it is, I think. There are some variations. So, as I said, direct payments give you kind of a slightly different take on sometimes on what the person is able to cover, what kind of support they can go, and they have much more control over it through direct payments. If the person sometimes doesn't have capacity or doesn't want to manage their own direct payment, that can be done. Currently, we can do it through the council through a managed direct payment, but ideally through an ISF, which I've now forgotten what it stands for, but I think it's Individual Service Fund. Yeah. So sometimes we've got a few of them. It's a developing process in Greenwich, but it's basically like a charity will hold the money on behalf of the individual and will manage the kind of, if it's employing carers, for example, they'll do that process so the individual doesn't have to do it themselves. And we're trying to move it out of the council because council bureaucracy, as you can imagine, is clunky, to put it politely. So, and so MENCAP, for example, Greenwich MENCAP has recently become an ISF. They tend to have small caseloads. I think they've got 10 or 20 people at the moment through their ISF. It just gives more flexibility for the use of those direct payments, and my kind of things can happen a bit more quickly and a bit more responsively as needs change. Micro enterprises is another thing that we're developing, but it's essentially a service provider, but small service provider. So it might be an individual that does. We have an example of a barber that provides mental health support, for example, and he's a sole trader, and we've set them up and supported them to become a sole trader and deliver this service, and they're funded primarily through direct payments. But we're sort of trying to create a wider, more choice-based market of services so that it's not just your standard. It might also include personal care, etc., someone coming and doing some cooking and cleaning and whatnot. But it might include you want to go swimming once a week, and you've got somebody who is a specialist with learning disabilities and swimming who can take you to Charlton Lido and manage that and support that with you, for example, those kind of things. So it's a growing thing, and we've got a small number of them, but it's something you might hear more about over the time in terms of micro enterprises. But it's basically just small providers that the council is supporting to become good quality managed providers.
And possibly supporting into like paid employment.
Yeah, exactly.
Things like that as well.
Yeah.
Which we're passionate about.
Which is something I haven't talked about at all on this, but encouraging and supporting people to access employment is a really key part of what we're delivering. As a primary mechanism for independence where it's appropriate. Challenges. So, I'm talking longer than I thought I would. I thought I'd add way too much time. So the availability, the types of accommodations I've talked about is still a problem. It's something we're really working on, particularly providers who want to manage more, we need to manage more complex and varied needs. Particularly things like substance misuse issues combined with mental health or learning disability or physical disabilities can be very problematic and very difficult to find providers. And it might mean a range of different providers. So you might, the individual might end up in a particular supported accommodation placement, but have an extra package of care that's specifically targeting, for example, substance misuse. They might have a support worker that comes in with a specialism in that on a regular basis. Recruitment's difficult for us as a council. Recruitment's difficult for care providers. There's a massive, as I'm sure you're aware, national shortage of care providers, hence unpaid carers. But recruitment for individuals looking for people to provide their kind of one-to-one personal care and support can be very difficult. Managing, and that's where ISFs, I think, are really helpful because they can take some of the stress out of that. Social worker capacity, I'm not going to lie about it, is very, very stretched. I'm absolutely convinced every single one of our social workers is desperate to do the right thing all the time and can't always. And you might get forgotten. Your review might be late. it just happens. And they're really, really working on it. And as a system, we're trying to find ways to kind of streamline stuff internally. I know they're doing trials of some AI stuff at the moment to help social workers with paperwork, which is going to be interesting to see. But I think the only thing I can say on that is just chase. Keep chasing. Don't feel that you're being impolite by constantly emailing. You send the same email every day until you get a response if you want to. They're going to hate me for saying that, but do it, because sometimes things just get slipped. I get on average 150 emails a day, and sometimes I miss them because I don't have time to read them all. And I'm not a social worker. Suitability, as I've talked about, decision-making. Decision-making can be problematic in this process. What you feel and what the individual feel the needs are might not align necessarily what the social worker, what the assessment has come up with. That probably is a big area of contention and quite difficult to navigate. But I think, again, it's be persistent, advocate, seek additional advocacy if you need it, from the, whether it's advocacy in Greenwich or various other organisations that are there to support. Social worker, like I said, will not be trying to do something deliberate. They will not be trying to stop something from happening because it's too expensive. It might seem like that's what the case is, but then that's not part of the decision-making process. Us as commissioners might go, is there a way we can source this cheaper and more effectively? But the cost of a package isn't one of those primary requisites. Well, it shouldn't be part of that decision-making process. Is what is the need of the individual, and it's our job to find that in a cost-effective way. But yeah, challenge. The emotional impacts, as Shelley said, don't be hard on yourselves. This is a really, really difficult process. It's, the person you've loved and cared for is might be moving into a different scenario, a different building, different people, different care workers. It's hard. It's really, really hard, and it's okay for that to be hard. And sometimes it can feel like you're fighting this big clunky system, and you are to an extent. But we are genuinely trying to do the best we can to kind of minimise that and recognise the difficulty that's inherent within this process.
And having to have those difficult conversations, like we do appreciate it isn't easy.
Yeah.
And we want to be here to try and help make that a lot more smoother. Oh, sorry. I'm saying about it, we know that you have to have some difficult conversations sometimes that aren't really very nice, and we're trying to work to make that easier in terms of the services that are going to be available for your peace of mind as well.
Yeah.
To know that your loved one, the person you're caring for, is going to be in a service that is doing everything possible for them, the same way you would be with them at home.
Yeah. And I'd say 99% of our services are fantastic, and if they're not, tell us, and we will jump on it.
Yeah.
Absolutely jump on it.
We're passionate about that.
Passionate, yeah.
Very.
So planning, Berlin's already talked about. I'm not going to that, but plan early is the general gist of that. And then that's it from us, really. So what I've got some questions there. We don't have to answer them, or you can come and give us some feedback. We can write it on a post-it note. I don't know how much time we've got. I think there might be one or two questions. I'm not supposed to do this, but yeah.
Unfortunately, we rely on out of the borough services now. Right. However, there aren't many. And when we find one, for example, we have to use our benefits, which is the BIP, to pay for transport, which doesn't even cover the transport because it's over £100 a day to pay for us to go there. So there is none in Greenwich. The social worker doesn't have to fund anything. And when we find something and it goes through the commissioning team, then we will be asked, okay, how are you going to get there? As I did not put my child in this position, it was someone's decision in the council to close all the facilities here. And now I have to use benefits that's supposed to be supporting the person to pay for the transporters. I have no decision taking as well. So now we can't access the respite. My child who is under mental health support and medical needs support. The care coordinator for mental health, they don't have the big authority, so it's mainly how to support, to sustain the service given by the social worker who has all the decision making. So now, how we can tackle this, it looks all nice and pink and beautiful, but in reality, it's not.
Yeah.
So we know what should happen, but whoever takes a decision, don't they think of solution before they stop something from existing, which is already not much? And then
Yeah.
one size that doesn't fit all. Like, I see they say, oh, this service provider provides this, but what does it offer? My young person has a personality, has a character, has hobbies, and I don't want my child to go inside one room somewhere, just looking at each other playing big bingo all day. That's
Yeah,
not how
absolutely.
I imagine my person's life. So transport is a huge issue.
Okay.
If you want someone to have a successful supported living, they need to be prepared years ahead due to the learning by opportunity, but there is none. So
Yeah.
how are we
Yeah.
going to tackle this problem?
I mean, yeah, I mean, we agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
For an annual review.
Yeah.
If this transition is going to take a couple of weeks, then yes, the social worker might still be there, but they come and they go and they don't even say bye-bye. That is the situation in Greenwich. So all of that is contradictory. And what Ian just raised with transport, I do a 90-mile round trip to take my son to Avril in West Sussex for respite. And I've taken that out of his benefits. I could probably change it and pay for it from his direct payments, but Greenwich, they don't want to think outside of the box. And when you go to them with something else that doesn't fit their model or the model or framework that you already have in place, they shut it down just like that. So that is all well and good being up there, but that does not work in practice.
Okay. No. I think this. I'm not disagreeing with any of that. You're absolutely right. It is a flawed system. I can't comment, and this is not me. Well, it is slightly me copying out, but we're adult services, not children's services, and it is slightly different. What I've talked about today is adult services. It's different. Oh, you're all adults. Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think as well, I agree with what you're saying, and I think historically, it has been like that. We're a new team of commissioners that have been in place pretty much since November, and these are the visions we've got. So whilst we work within the council's budget constraints a lot of the time, the majority of us in the team, we hear you and we feel where you're coming from, and there are a range of respite options, but we don't believe that they're sufficient. We do think more needs to be out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you may not see all of what we're doing, and it may seem very, very slow to you, which unfortunately within the council, we have to go through our processes, and we battle with that sometimes, but we want you to have a range of in-borough respite services. We know how important that is, and we are here now as a new team to try and make that happen.
But there are budget constraints that get it cost double to send my son where he goes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Honestly, yeah, we agree.
So one of the reasons why we're moving away, we want to put a framework in place for our spot purchase accommodation, is that it is significantly more expensive, potentially much more expensive, particularly if it's out of borough placements for respite or long-term placements.
Yeah.
So we need to bring them back in-house. We need to bring them back into the borough. We need to create the stuff. But
Yeah.
the difficulty is there are budget constraints because, it's finite. I'm sure you all know about, everything that's happening to the council. But and Greenwich is not in as bad a position as some places, but it's still very, very tight, and we're still having to make savings. No, I know, absolutely. But there's I would say, as Shelley said, there's a genuine commitment to try and resolve that situation. And
Yeah.
please talk to us, keep giving us feedback. I know it's
Yeah,
more
we
than happy
we
to-
want to change.
I've been told to wrap it up, but we're going to hang around, so if you want to talk to us. Sorry. Sorry? No, nothing at all.
Also, would you, both ladies, be happy to email us with what your feedback was?
You can email us.
I don't know their names. Is it Ilma? Sorry, Ilhan.
Please do take us our email addresses and
Would you both be happy to email myself and Rikki? The email addresses are here.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
okay, cool.
can you email us with your feedback as well?
It's not about the budget, it's the so the logistics. And for some reason, they don't know where to put the money rightly. Like, if the money was used to hire high-risk people to run the respite service here in the tree house, we wouldn't have this problem. We are the budget, the borough with the highest budget for transport because we keep sending our
Yeah.
people outside
Yeah.
the borough, so it doesn't make
Yeah.
Yeah. But just give hope with us. We're new and we are really trying to move this away from what it has been. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we're trying.
At the end of the day, what matters to me is to have a happy person in the house.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
As parents ourselves, we really do understand. Yeah, we do.
Cool. So feel free to email me. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right.
We get out of the
So
way.
thank you to Rikki and Shelley for